Hello, everyone, and welcome to our AppSheet App Jam, focused on formatting sheets, sharing apps, and general troubleshooting. My name is Lauren, and I'm the content manager for the Google Cloud community, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Christian and Rich from the AppSheet team, who will be taking you through the content and answering your questions today. So before diving into the content, I just want to remind everyone that questions are encouraged, and it's great to see so many questions, comments already coming through that chat. So please keep them coming. We'll be sure to get to them either in the chat or at the end of the presentation where we have some time reserved for Q&A. It is great to see where you all are joining from around the world. So thank you so much for joining us. So for any questions that we don't get to, just a reminder that we encourage you to use the AppSheet community. So you can search for and create new posts and get your questions answered. And the link to that AppSheet community is in the YouTube description for a quick reference. All right, with that, I know we have a lot to get through today. So Christian, Rich, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome, thank you. So yes, just to kind of introduce ourselves a bit, we have Rich, who's our global AppSheet CE lead, and I'm a product manager for the AppSheet product myself. So very happy to be here, and thanks for setting us up, Lauren. Always happy to do these. So today we're going to be talking about essentially one of the bigger challenges for people who are just getting started. They have some data in a sheet. I have numerous times where people come out and they'll reach out to me and say, oh, I have this data, but I don't know exactly how to get started and take that first step into making a productive, actual useful app. And there's actually some fairly simple tips that you can just keep in mind as you're kind of making the transition from a sheet or an Excel or a Google sheet into make it so that it very easily can get ingested or imported into your AppSheet editing environment. So I'll go through those formatting tips and tricks. I'll also spend some time on sharing and publishing your apps. So there's a couple different things you can do, whether you're sharing with co-authors or where you're sharing with a small group of people, or where you're sharing with a larger group, like with a domain, or even like with folks within a Google group. And then Rich is going to go over app troubleshooting. So he has a number of topics that he's going to step through, and then that will pretty much wrap it up as is. Any other comments from you, Rich?
No, I don't have any. Go ahead, Christian.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So let me just jump into the very high level introduction of making sure that your sheet is ready and can be ingested or imported into your AppSheet app. Again, it's not actually imported. It does remain separate on its own, but basically by importing or creating an AppSheet app based off of a sheet, it will define an AppSheet table. It will define the relationships between the different tables and such. So in this sense, it's good to follow a few best practices, mainly on the column names, also understanding what AppSheet keys are and how they ensure the unique rows themselves, and also working with relational data. So typically when you're coming from a sheet, you're going to have very flat data. You're going to have a lot of columns. And if you're not so well versed in relational databases, you may not kind of have a feel for it just yet with regards to how you can normalize the data and how you can remove redundancies. And so we'll talk about that as well. All right. And if I have some time, we'll talk a little bit about troubleshooting as well. All right. So first off, if you have a sheet, a lot of times, and I've seen numerous sheets within our different groups here in Google, you're going to have fairly diverse sets of column names. You're going to have data that may not be consistent. So there's a number of things that you want to try to avoid. So don't have any characters or special characters, I guess as we call it, in your actual column names. And then you'll also want to remove extra space if it's unneeded. So if you can kind of keep it fairly short, just simple column names, it's all that's really needed. And then when you get into the actual data itself, you want to try to be consistent as much as possible. I'll talk about a little bit of that, more of that in a bit. But basically, you know, you can see some of the examples there in the slide there where it's like, you know, something that, you know, kind of implies the data type. So a phone or an address or things like that. That allows the AppSheet import mechanism to say, oh, okay, this looks like it's an actual address. Oh, this looks like a phone number, or this looks like, you know, text, just straight text, or this could be Boolean. This could be yes or no, true or false, things like that. So this is like this all happens within a few seconds when you actually import or I would say create an app based off of a sheet. Another very important point is that obviously numerous sheets are going to have formulas. And so right off the bat, you're going to have to go through and make sure you don't have any formulas that are calculating or deriving values on the fly. There's obviously you can do it in a different way inside of AppSheet. So it's best to kind of clean out the data, remove any formulas, and then also just clean it up from a general sense of like if you're having repeated columns, putting numeric columns, etc. You're just going to go for cleaning it up in that sense, right?
Real quick, Christian, before we continue, one thing on the formulas in a spreadsheet, just to add additional context there, it's not that you can't use formulas, you can, but the app will require a sync before you actually see updated data. So it's not going to be ideal from the user perspective. So it's something you'll want to consider and just make sure you're aware of in that sense.
Okay. Yeah, good point. So I said a few minutes ago also the way that AppSheet interprets the data is that it will key off of like column names and the actual data in like a set of rows that's there. So for example, if you have a column name date or due date, it will just assume, okay, you mean like the actual date data type. So as you get, if you're starting out with AppSheet, you're going to essentially have all of these native data types that are built into it, and they will apply, or AppSheet will essentially intelligently apply those data types to what it expects those columns, the kind of data that's coming within those columns. So for example, if you have an email column, then you're going to expect an email, data type, and you're going to see in your app an ability to send emails and such. Similar for images, you're going to, if you have photo or image or whatever, it's just going to go ahead and auto assign those things. Now, again, this is a little bit of a screenshot on the right side. You can always override those. So when you're in the table editor, you can go through and pick and choose the most appropriate data types. All right. So these are always good as you're getting started and you find it a little bit confusing. These are just some basic initial steps on how to make sure that your data is being interpreted correctly and being handled correctly in the application that you generate. All right. Keys are very important. Keys basically allow AppSheet to uniquely identify each record, so you have a way to locate it. So typically when you just have a flat piece of data, AppSheet will go through and automatically assign a column or multiple columns to derive essentially what's the best key for uniquely identifying each row. And so you can actually help yourself out by, say, for example, a common practice is to create an ID column. So you have a column named ID, and then that will serve as your unique key or row identifier. And then you can also add a small function there called unique ID whenever you create a new record, and you can just set the ID or unique ID into the ID column that you create, thus ensuring a uniqueness for your rows. Okay. And so I have a demo here that let me just explain what it is. I'll start off with like a flat sheet, which has like data from tasks, projects, owners. And then I'll show you kind of a before and after of how I go about cleaning it. Okay. So if you're ready to switch over to my screen, Lauren. And so once I get an indication that we're switched over to my demo screen. So hopefully Lauren will switch it over.
You're good.
Oh, good. I just saw it on my other screen here. Okay, great. So what we're looking at is a poorly formatted project tracker in a Google Sheet. So in this sense, you can see I have very long-winded column names. I have question marks. I have quotes. I have a number of different things, other special characters. I have inconsistent data. I have like false, true, and then I have possibly unknown, things like that that are kind of wonky. I have dates that are not really in the consistent format, and then also, more importantly, you can see that everything's flat. The structure is flat. So I have, not only do I have tasks, but I have projects, and then I have project owners. And then I could have actually filled this sheet out with all the data. So I could have project owner, phone number, email, the project owner's number, address, phone number, all that stuff that could just fill out columns, A through Z. But that's not really the most appropriate way to build an app such as this. And so this is where I kind of just do a quick switch here, and I'll switch over to cleaned up version. So here is the sheet that I've cleaned up. And first off, you'll see that there is a column here that I've named ID, and I have some default values there. And so this will allow AppSheet to then say, okay, I'm going to assign this column to be my key column. And then I can also add a unique ID function whenever I create a new record, and that will generate a new unique ID for that column. Also, you can see that the data is consistent here. So these are just Boolean values, true, false, yes, no, and AppSheet will be able to understand this. I also have consistent dates here. And likewise, you'll see that I don't have that long, flat structure. I actually have a project reference here. And so this actually is referring to this tab of the same name. So this is kind of the trick where you can establish a relationship between the different tabs in your sheet, which will then be interpreted as essentially a relational database, and it will set up references inside your application. So again, this is like a column that has the same name as another tab in my spreadsheet. So here's my spreadsheet of all the projects, and it's essentially linked in the manner where it's like each task has a corresponding parent project. So like many to one, etc. And then for each project, I have name, description, due date, and so forth. I even have like a budget. And then you'll see there's another reference or relationship between projects and the owners. And so this column here, column G, refers to the owner tab or table, and then I have a whole table of all the information that makes sense for the owners. So this is a good way to structure your data in general. And so that kind of, if you're kind of new to relational databases, this is where it's like you can start to make the transition from a sheet, kind of a typical flat sheet, into more of like a relational data set. All right. So now that I've had my data set up, let's go ahead and take the next step and ingest this or import this into, or generate, I guess is the best way to say it, a new app in AppSheet. All right, so AppSheet will go through, interpret the data, and set up the appropriate data for me. Again, this is still preliminary stuff, but it's good for people who are just getting started with AppSheet. They'll understand what to expect. All right, so here we go. I have the AppSheet editor in front of us. And then if I click over here on the tables or the data editor, you can see that I have the table task. And then there's my table editor. All right, so it's gone through, it has assigned different data types automatically. So it's like, it says, okay, it's a date, it's a number, yes, no, essentially a Boolean value. It's also assigned the key to the ID column here, right? So that it did what we expected to do. Now you'll also notice that we don't have the other two tables yet. In earlier versions of AppSheet, it would automatically just generate those related tables. But we took a step back and we just made it so that you can just click on add new data. And then there you have it. It's right there. It's just a suggestion to add the project table. And so I'll click add to app. And then as I do that, it will set up the references, or essentially the relationships between the two tables. So now you can see I have related tasks to the project table. And then if I click on the tasks table, you'll see that there's a project column here of type ref. And I could even open that up in the editor, and you'll see that it actually has this source table project, which will allow us to essentially link the two tables together. And you'll see that when the app is generated, it will generate the appropriate UI that allows you to traverse those relationships. All right. So now let's go ahead and click on add a new data. I'm going to add the third table, the owner table, or the data in the tab of the spreadsheet, that is. So now we have our three tables. No worries about this little hint there or email, just to let you know that you may have some sensitive data. This is something that you can kind of leave alone. It's not a problem at the moment. So anyway, we have owners. The owners have related projects. We have projects. We have related tasks, and then we have tasks themselves, which have a reference to the project. So it's all related together in the slide that I showed you before. All right. So now we have our application. We have our data model set up. But over here in our preview window, we just have the single task table. So now I'm just going to quickly generate some views for it. So I click on the view editor, and I'll click on under the primary navigation, which is this bar at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus button. And then I can just say, okay, well, let's go ahead and add a card view, or actually, let's do the photo for our owners. And I'm not going to do too much editing of the app, but I'm just going to change the name. So it's called owners, and we have that there at the top there, and we have the images already in line there. And I'm going to go ahead and add one more. I'll just create this from scratch. So we have owners, tasks, and I'm going to base it off of projects. Oops, there we go. All right, and I can even change maybe some of the positioning or what have you. So as you can see, maybe I want tasks to be on the far left. So I'll click on the little quick edit there with the little pencil, and I can say I want that icon to be on the far left there, or be the first one to be appeared. And then maybe I'll do the owners. Here we go. And I'll put that to last. So that's the position that I want. Now I can click through. I have tasks that belong to projects, and I have owners. And also, if I click on any one of these, actually, let me click save just to make sure everything's all synced up. So if I click on a particular task, I can see that it has a project. And if I look through it, I see the project has an owner. And you can see also the owner's related tasks. So everything's all intro related, I guess. So this is exactly what we want. And yeah, I think at this point, I think we can, let's see, was there anything else I wanted to do on this one? Probably not. We can probably go back to the slides if that works. Sorry. Do you want to take us back to the slides, Lauren?
Okay, should be good. Christian?
Okay. Okay, cool. So just to finish up what I was explaining, I took that initial flat table and then I turned it into a relational database. Then I walked through generating the app. But next I want to talk about sharing and publishing your apps. So I have a couple of topics here that I'm going to get into. So basically I'll walk through what it is, what is AppSheet's sharing model, what does it allow you to do? So first off, it's like you can share an app with either co-authors or, say some early users of the app itself. And then you can also share it broadly with multiple users when your app development is complete. So I'll walk through the process that you would go about typically. So first off, you have a share dialog. It's a little icon at the top right where you can just add individuals via their email addresses and have them become either users or co-authors. You can make them a basic user or an admin user. And so that's like your initial stage of starting to open up development. There's also, once you've got the app into a pretty good state, you can then take the next step to say, okay, let's do a deployment check. So there's I'll do this in a second, but basically you click on a button and it will run a report, and it will essentially give you a report card of how it deems if your application is ready for final deployment. And typically there's a few little warnings that says you want to go ahead and include like some descriptions and so forth, but nothing major out of a simple app such as like this. And then you can click on deploy, and that will actually change your app into a deployed state. This very minor difference between an app that is not deployed and an app that is deployed is just kind of like a state that it changes. But if you want to create chat apps, if you want to generate a chat version, you do actually have to deploy your app. Minor point there, but yeah. All right. So if I walk through this a little bit more, I'll do this in the demo, but basically I'll walk through the process of sharing your app as well as deploying the app. So, and then the other thing I'll show later on is essentially how you can share it with individual accounts in the entire domain or like domain groups. And so that's actually fairly useful. And then the other thing I'll wrap up is like how to take your app, you've done it, it's ready to go, and you want to share it with the world or what have you, even with the larger teams and such. You have the ability to do that via your public gallery or your portfolio. And so it's pretty simple. You can just publish it. There's a few steps here where you can expand this teamwork section and make your app like a public sample. And then you would also take your account ID number and append it to this particular URL. So appsheet.com/portfolio. And then that's a URL where you can start to share with the rest of the people. And you can also define how much of the app do you want to share? Do you want to make it read-only? Do you want to have people just use the app, or do you want them to be able to go in and view the contents or to copy and stuff like that? So you have pretty good granular control over that stuff. Right? And then finally, I'll step through the process by which you would go through and create a new auth domain that will allow you to essentially share your app to a Google group. All right. So to do that, what you would do is you would create a Google group first, and then you add the members, or maybe you already have an existing Google group. And then under the My Account setting, and I'll walk this in the product as well, but under the My Account page in AppSheet, you'll create a new auth domain, and you'll select Google Cloud essentially as your new auth domain. And then you go into the app itself, and then there is under security and then domain authentication, you can click require domain authentication, and then you select the auth domain and the actual group that you've created. Okay, and there is like a good video out there that I would recommend that you can check out there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start walking through those steps. So if we can switch over to the demo. All right, so first off, I have this app here that I've created. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up the sharing dialog here. So in this case, I'm just going to have a specific named user. All right. So I've set it up that I'm going to share it with this particular user. I can also turn on the advanced settings where I can say, not only do I want this person to use the app or view the definition, I'm going to make it so that they're a full co-author and they can actually edit the definition. I can even toggle the app role. So if I want the app to be an admin, or if I want this user to be an admin of the app, I can specify that. I'll leave that as a straight user and then default for the app version. And I'll just click on I'm not a robot, and I'll click send. And this will send this little invite to this other user. So I'll click done, and I'll jump over to the other user. All right. So I should see an email pop in any second. There we go. And so now the other person, in this case, it's a person named Claire, as you can see right there. Claire can go in and see the invitation, and then there's a link there, or a button, I guess, where they can go ahead and edit the application, or they can install it. And so like if you're on a mobile device and you get this invite, you can actually click install, and that will install the app for you, ready to use on your phone. In this case, I'll go ahead and click edit. So we're now accepting our invite, and I can go through and see all of the same data. So I'm going to click accept. So now we're up and running on the application. I could go through and maybe make some updates on this side of things. So maybe I want to change some of the branding, maybe change the primary color. Just pick a random logo there, click save. So now as an equal co-author, this person is now, or Claire, I should say, is doing some of the updates as well. All right. And then if I go back over to my main screen here, you'll see a note that says newer version of the app exists, and it just says to reload the page. And then we should see over here on the preview window, the visual, like the updates. So now I have essentially that green primary color there for my app. Okay. So I've done that. I've shared it. I can do a few more things, but I want to step into the public gallery really quickly. And so if I go through, let's see, under manage, under collaborate and publish. Incidentally, if I wanted to transfer my app to make someone else the owner, I could actually, in my other account, I could click on the transfer and have it issue a request to the application owner. I won't do that right now because I'm going to stay in this account as the application owner. But to publish my app, I can click on the teamwork, and I can click on make this a public sample. If I had a team set up, I could also make this a team sample. And if I don't want the users to be able to actually edit or actually see the app definition, I could leave that, or I could change that, toggle that, I guess. All right. So I'm going to change the visibility. So at this point, I have essentially my enterprise project tracker that I've defined. And now all I have to do is just go for the, as you can see, I have my appsheet.com/portfolio. I have my account ID. And then you'll see that I have like, I'll do a quick refresh and we'll see this new enterprise tracker. Oop. Anyway, well, you'll take my word for it. It's there. So I have my public portfolio. I've shared the application. Let me do one more quick step just to show you how to share apps within the group. So if I go back to my enterprise project tracker, and what I'm going to do now is show you how you can do domain authentication. All right. So to do that, I've actually done this before where I have my simple survey app, and then my Kanban app. And I have this domain authentication checkbox checked. I also have this under my account. I created a new auth domain. I can show you really quickly how I did that. But basically, I would go under integration, auth domains, and I click on new auth domain. And then I can select that. And then that would it will allow me to have essentially a new auth domain by which I can then associate with my Google group. All right. So if I go back over to my app here, I would then select my auth domain. And then the other thing that I didn't quite show yet is my Google group that I've created. So I have a Google group that I've created. And so I'm associating the Google group with the auth domain. And if I go back to my application here, the final step here is to actually select the Google group. And so that's the one, my AppSheet Access group. That's the name that I've defined for this Google group. And so once that's all said and done, anyone that's in that Google group that's in this member list here, so as you can see, I have Claire over there. You can see over here that Claire has the same access to the application. And then for the Kanban board, I actually did the same thing. I have this shared in a similar manner. So as you can see, in a completely different user, they're able to access it, not just via a named user, but also via the Google group. Okay, so I think that's probably about it. Hopefully I can
add some, Christian, some additional context in here to this feature that you were just covering about domain authentication.
Yep.
This is available for enterprise plans. So that would require an enterprise plan. And also when Christian was talking about publishing and sharing the apps publicly, that was about, maybe you could go back to that really quickly, Christian. That section wasn't necessarily about publishing your app so that it was available to the users. It was about sharing your application to other app creators so that they could discover what you created. And as an app creator, you could copy those applications. So I just want to make sure that was clear because publishing, there's different methods of publishing. Whether you're publishing for your end users, which is as simple as sharing your app with emails, and then there's the publishing and making your app available to the rest of your team or externally in the public realm.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I went through those points a little bit quickly, but thanks for highlighting that. But yeah,
no worries. Maybe I wasn't listening.
Oh, no, it's like there's a couple of things here. I have my notes here, so sometimes I rifle through some of these fairly quickly. But I also wanted to make sure I left enough time for you to go through your content as well. But anyway, I'll go back to the slides, I guess, if that's okay, Lauren?
You're good.
Cool, awesome.
Okay. All right, looks like it's my turn. I think so. Christian, you done?
Yep, all good.
Okay, cool. All right. So, hey, everybody, we're going to go over app troubleshooting, right? So this can be confusing if you don't understand how AppSheet is actually structured and looking out for some of the key features, right, and capabilities of what AppSheet offers for troubleshooting, right? So we're going to cover several different areas like errors and warning. Those are kind of your more obvious issues that can appear in your app. AppSheet does a great job at making sure that if you do have the equivalent of a compilation error or something that will not work in your application, AppSheet will shut down the app and actually give you an error message and tell you exactly what's wrong. So we'll cover that, and then we'll go into the app hierarchy and how to trace logic errors or something in your app that doesn't appear to be functioning correctly. Maybe there's an action button that's not showing and you're like, why is this button not showing? We'll cover that app hierarchy and how AppSheet's structured and how you can go through that hierarchy to figure out where there's an issue with preventing something from showing in your app or your app functioning a certain way. And then we'll end by covering audit logs, the performance logs, and automation logs. And these are all going to be very important tools when your users have errors or your users are experiencing slow load times to help you understand and isolate the root cause of those issues. So I am going to share my screen here, and I think I did it, and we got it here. Cool. And let me make sure can I do this? Okay, good. We got this screen large enough. So I'm in my app here, and the first thing we're going to cover is warnings and error messages. So warnings in AppSheet will appear as, this little yellow exclamation point, and it's not necessarily an error at all. It is what it sounds like. It's a warning that AppSheet has done something or is doing something, and it's meant to just let you know that, just for context, because AppSheet will change, will do things automatically for you. And if you're not paying attention to these warning messages, you might get frustrated because AppSheet will do something that is unexpected if you're not paying attention to these warning messages. So for example here, if I'm in a table, so I'm going to a table here, and I'm going to pop this over real quick, and let me make this a little bit smaller. There we go. And let's say I am turning off maybe this parent ID field, and I want to uncheck show. When I go ahead and hit save, then AppSheet's going to do something automatically for me as well, in that because it's hidden, the column's set to unsearchable. So this is an example of a warning message that may come up here, whereas if we go into our column settings and we scroll down here under other properties, our column is no longer searchable because we made it not shown, right? So if AppSheet is ever doing something, when you save and when you hit the save button and it seems to not be saving the action that you accomplished, make sure you look at this warning message here after you hit the save button, and AppSheet will tell you what it did and why it did it and why it maybe reverted your change in the first place. Likewise, when you create automations, for example, as well, you'll see that there's warning messages here telling that, something is not going to happen. Like, since my app is not deployed, emails will not come over to me. So this is your basic, basic level of troubleshooting in your application is, if something's not working correctly, go to the warning messages and make sure that these warning messages aren't covering the area that you are, trying to figure out what's wrong with your app. And then you can also see where these warnings are in your application by the yellow dots in the nav bar as you click around in there. And then there'll be dots as well against each table and each column, highlighting where that warning applies. So next, we're going to talk about spreadsheet formulas, for example, because that came up earlier when we were talking about spreadsheet formulas. If we were to come in here and put like a spreadsheet formula in place, and we save it, or maybe we're regenerating our table, and we have spreadsheet formulas still in our table. When we do that, AppSheet is also going to give us warning messages, because it's going to assume that because we have a formula in our spreadsheet, we want to use that. And one of the things AppSheet will do automatically here, because we have a sheet formula, is mark a column as read only, right? So this is all done automatically just to save you in steps. So this is also a common pattern. Like, people are confused why their column is not allowed to be edited and changeable in the application. It's because you have this warning message in place where AppSheet has set that to a read-only field. So next, we're going to move on to errors. So errors will happen when there's essentially going to be a compilation error. So when your app gets compiled by the AppSheet service, there's going to be a hard error with the logic of your application, and that it won't work. So one example would be, I'm going to do a very simple example. Maybe I have a formula in my app where I'm going to concatenate values, right? So I'm going to spell concatenate wrong because I do that all the time. It's an impossible word. And I'm going to concatenate a couple values together. Maybe, parent ID and description. And when I save my application, I will get an error and my app shuts down. So before you panic, you'll want to make sure that you click on the errors here in the top right corner and look at what AppSheet has to tell you here. And a lot of times it's going to tell you exactly what you did wrong with the formula here. Did you mean concatenate? And you could click on go to the problem, and which is going to basically do the drill down for you and take you directly to the column itself that has the error, so that you can then come in to the column and update the formula to correct that formula. And then also, you could avoid this by just letting the expression editor validate your checks as well. This was just meant to kind of show you what happens when you have an error. So regardless of the changes you make, there's really no reason why you can't work through those errors, because I see this sometimes too with customers. There's panic that happens because you change a column name and you have a lot of stuff break. Well, a lot of times that is just because there's dependencies on that column name. And if you use the error log in your application, you can kind of just step through each of those errors and make sure you go through and change everything. And once everything's fixed, your app will work again. And just like with the warning messages, you have your little, circles here in the nav bar, in the table, that will let you trace exactly where that issue is so you can address it. Okay, so that's it on warnings and errors in the app. Next, we're going to get into references, and this pesky error that typically comes up a lot of times when you're dealing with the references that Christian talked about earlier. So if an application here, let me go back and see what I've done here. Because I made parent ID as this example here. Let me remove this spreadsheet formula so I can actually do my example here. Okay. All right, we'll use this as an opportunity to actually undo stuff, since there's an error here with the way my column is displaying. So this will get into the next part, and we'll get back to it. But let's look at this field here. I'm looking for my parent ID column, and I don't see it. So it's not here, and I'm like, why is it not available? And I look in my view settings, and I could see that it's not there. And ultimately what it comes down to is, if you remember from earlier, and it's probably in the comments, probably people remembered what I actually did when I forgot. There's this show option that I toggled at the beginning, because at the table level, I made that value disappear. So you can see when I affect things at the high level, the table level, my columns can be affected across my whole application, across the views. And we'll have a little slide here in a second to kind of show you what that pattern looks like. But anyway, on this section here, what I wanted to show you really quick is in the app here, you'll sometimes get this little exclamation mark, this little warning message with your application. And when you have a ref value, right? So parent ID in our table here is a ref value. And sometimes the ref values will get these little markers next to them. All that means is that that value cannot be found in the parent table. If I'm going to, just as an example, go and switch back to the spreadsheet behind this app, you'll see that in our parent table, we only have this ID in here is 1. We don't have a 2 value. So because our child table here has a parent ID of 2, AppSheet is not finding those values in the parent table. And that's what causes the warning message here in the app. AppSheet's basically saying, I can't find this value in the parent table, so I'm just going to say that there's a problem here with the value. Whereas if I come in and make sure my table actually has the value and give it a description, then when my app is synced, you'll see that that warning label will go away because AppSheet has then found that value here for the parent ID, and it can be used appropriately throughout your application. So just remember that. You see the warning label inside of your actual application. That means that is a reference column that cannot find anything in the table that is being referenced. All right, so next we're gonna get into app hierarchy as a whole, and I'm gonna flip over to a slide here that I set for this the session today, in that AppSheet can help with compilation errors and give you nice warning and error messages when something is not quite right. However, AppSheet can't take care of errors with your logic in your processes or ways you've configured your app that are valid, such as certain actions not showing in views or certain formulas not calculating how you want them to calculate. Obviously, AppSheet has no way of knowing what your intent is. So as long as there's not an actual compilation issue, then AppSheet will do what it's told to do from a logic perspective. So it's important to remember the app hierarchy to help you track certain issues and help you figure out and isolate where those problems are in your application. And it basically works like this. Everything in AppSheet starts at the table level. So whatever the table settings are, this includes whether you set the table as read only or allowing for adds and updates, or even having security filters on the table, that takes priority over everything else in your application. And then you can kind of work your way down. So the next level would be columns, column attributes. If you set a column as read only, that means that column will be read only everywhere in your application, no matter what view you connect to that column. Then we get into kind of a divide here because you can have slices and you can actually just have tables as well. So if you create slices, slices can have its own rules as well. What columns are included in the slices, whether slices are read only or allow for edits in the application, what actions are allowed in that slice. So that's a next level of hierarchy. If you use slices in your app, you need to look at what are my rules around those slices and make sure that those rules are set up and are in alignment of your the logic that you want in your application. And then we get into views, which will infer the permissions from slices and columns and tables. And then lastly, actions. If you've set actions to not be available in a slice, for example, then there's no way you can ever have them available in a view that's connected to that slice. So yeah, so please everyone, you can take a screen grab of this. This is good to have, and use this as a way to figure out what's going on. And this is actually just kind of what happened earlier when I was trying to figure out why that parent ID column, wasn't showing in my app. You immediately go through this process of just thinking up and down this hierarchy and figuring out where that problem lies and where that those things aren't showing in the application. All right, so one quick example of this is going to be, why did I get signed out? Sorry, I got signed out of my notes window. but I can still see it. Okay, so anyway, yeah, so an example of this would be with, for example, my action, right? If I have an action here in a table, and this is, for example, I would expect this action to be in my parent table here. And I would expect this button to be here in the view, but it's not in this view. So I can kind of go through these steps to figure out where the problem may lie. So the first may be that, is this action showing in maybe this deck view? So I could come down here in my view and I could see if I've modified the actions for this view to augment what is allowed versus what may be in a additional level of the hierarchy. And I see here that I haven't modified my actions. So I could go to the next level, which is going to be, if we look down below this view, we could see that it's connected to a slice. We could click on this slice. And in this slice, when we look at it, we can see that I've specified specific actions for this slice. And it's the delete button, which is why I see that delete button. But you'll notice that other actions here in my dropdown have not been selected because I went from auto assign to selecting specific specific actions here. So now I could find the source of why my action button is not showing. And as soon as I correct that in my slice, it was now visible in the views for my application. Okay. And then as I showed earlier, at the table level, there's ways to control actions in table settings. So let's say for this child table here, if I go to table settings and I make everything read only, when I make things read only, then all of a sudden, a lot of my default actions also go away, like edit and actions like that. And in this case, edit was retained. So if I click on it, you'll see that. Why was it retained when I set it to read only? Well, the reason for this is the fact that you have a button in your app called finished that needs to have updates allowed in the table. So therefore, AppSheet is making sure updates are enabled because you have an action that is set there. So if you actually wanted to make this table read only, you would need to delete this action so that it's complying with the rules that you set in the table itself. And if we go back to this table, you'll see that AppSheet has left that updates enabled, right? So that last example hopefully ties back together a lot of different levels here of what we talked about, the app hierarchy, the warning labels, and how to use those effectively to figure out what might be going on in your application. The next thing we're going to cover here in the last remaining minutes is monitoring in the application. This can be found under Manage and the Monitor section. And there are three main areas that you would use for troubleshooting. One is with automation. So if you have some kind of automation that runs, your automation monitor will help you figure out the errors behind those if you're running into issues. Then there's audit. Usage stats just shows you the users that are using your app if you're interested. But audit history is actually a log of every single transaction, every sync, every update, every add, every interaction that a user has in your application is logged in audit history. And as a side note, if you do have a critical application and you wanted to be alerted when users start to have error message, then you could turn this on and get an email notification as soon as errors happen. And then lastly, for performance profile, this is where you can actually understand why things are taking so long in your app to sync and why it might be slow in the first place. So let's first jump into the audit log. So when we load this audit log, we can see a list of our transactions down below. And you have basic filters here where you could narrow in on specific dates. You can even narrow in on tables where changes have been made or specific users. And even, you have checkboxes up above to help you isolate specific transactions in your app that you'd want to try to troubleshoot from an end user perspective. So if a user comes to you and says, I have an error, then you can come to this audit log and actually see, an error that would happen. So you can see this error I had earlier where I broke my application. I have this error message, and I could click on these binoculars, this little binocular icon here, to actually see what happened in the application and why it may have failed. If you have any edits and updates, you can actually see the data that was submitted from the user through the application that gets written to the data source. So if you're trying to figure out why data may have changed in a certain way, this is also available in the audit log. You can also, export your data as well. And then also, just as a note, it's only going to show 1,000 records. So depending on how active your application is, you may need to narrow the focus of your start and end times to focus the results from that audit log. And if you check only display failures, then that does what it sounds like it does. It will only show the red error messages, the only red transactions in your app, so you can look at all the different errors together. Okay, so the last couple things we'll cover here is the automation monitor. So the automation monitor will show you when bots run. So you have your apps along the left side that exist in your account, and you could click on your app. And when you click on this app, it'll actually show you a list of bots that have run in the past amount of time. And it'll tell you whether they were successful or whether they were in error. And you click on these individual entries to understand the events that have been run, the processes that ran in place, and look through each individual step here to see if there is an error at those different stages in your automation. Okay, so I'd encourage you to explore this whenever you're using automations and something doesn't work correctly and seems to be failing. This will tell you directly what is going on, what bot has the error, and what step in those processes in your bot is the culprit. The last thing we'll cover here is performance profile. So I might have even seen some of the comments in here where you might have slow sync times. Well, this is where you're going to go to discover the reason for those sync time errors. First off, a lot of times it's caused by virtual columns. So we even have a special graph in the performance profile that show you your virtual columns that are causing issues or have times that may be taking a long time in the app. So on this vertical axis here, you can see that this is the time in seconds that these virtual columns are taking to compute. So if you see something that's like 4 or 5 seconds, then you know that is your, one virtual column or many virtual columns that are very time intensive to compute. So this would be your first step to check out. And then if these virtual columns really aren't the issue, then you'll want to come down here to each of the app syncs. So like the audit log, there is also each sync time is tracked here in the app, where you can click on the binoculars here and actually see how long it takes for each step in the sync process. So here I can see that under my sync, I have an app that's reading tables in parallel. So if you're on core, your app can read AppSheet core, your app can read 3 tables at a time. If you're on enterprise, AppSheet can read 10 tables at a time. And you can see here that I have my 3 tables that are syncing. The first 2 tables are small, they only take a second. And then we have this other table, which is much data wow, where there's like 50,000 records in the table. And we can see that it's taking 4 seconds to compute. So I could even drill down even more into this table. And this will also tell me if I have virtual columns that are being calculated as well. so I could figure out what's happening. But this is going to help you isolate exactly what is taking your app a long time to sync, so you can figure out a more efficient way of constructing your app to make it faster. And then, yeah, and then by default, it only shows the slow steps in your app. So you can actually turn this checkbox off so that you can show all of the tables and every single action that's being computed in your table syncs, to include showing each of the virtual column computations as well. So this will help you figure out what your issue is if you're wondering why your app has slowed down significantly. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be an expensive virtual column that should probably be moved into the spreadsheet for computation, or if you're using a database, in the backend database as a procedure. So with that, I know we're getting close on time, and we want to have some questions there. We can jump into the questions here and see what we can answer in the remaining 4 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for this content and the demos, and thank you everyone for sticking with us and for all of your comments. I know we just have about 5 minutes to get through those, and I know we've tackled a few in the comments as well. But before we do, just a quick reminder again, for any questions that we don't get to, please use the AppSheet community. And I saw a couple of people wanted to connect with each other as well. You can send each other private messages and collaborate and help problem solve with each other and with Googlers in that community space there. And then we'd also love to hear your feedback on this session, and if there are other topics you want us to hone in on for future topics. All right. So with that, let's dive in. Our first question is around domain auth. So is that not available to core licenses provided to Google Workspace? And if so, how can we allow everyone in our Google Workspace access to the app?
So yeah, that's a good question, right? So with core, yeah, domain authentication is not allowed. And when AppSheet uses the term domain authentication, it really means using external to AppSheet authentication sources like Cloud Identity, Azure Active Directory, Okta, things like that. If you wanted to share your app with your entire group and workspace, all you do is have to hit the share modal. And if I jump back over to my screen really quick, the share modal here in your app, and just share with your domain. So if I wanted to share with all the Googlers, I would just type in google.com, and I could share my app with the entire domain.
Awesome.
Also, there's a number of questions on what SKU, what version can you do, the various features. I put it out into the chat, but all you have to do is just Google AppSheet pricing, and you'll see a pretty good breakdown of the different SKUs. And then you can scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see like a more granular list of features. So, like for example, the authentication. You'll see stuff that Rich was just talking about: Okta, Cognito, OpenID, etc., all that stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Christian. Okay.
Yeah, I think in general, to help keep it simple too, to frame it, if you have AppSheet Core, you can make an app connected to a sheet or a very small AppSheet database, and that's it. And then use all the features inside of like actions and things like that. But think advanced data sources, advanced authentication mechanisms is where you would require enterprise.
Makes sense. And kind of going off of the topic of the databases, we do have one here. So can we implement such a use case in AppSheet? The data is located in BigQuery, and I need to edit the data using AppSheet and then send part of the data to a spreadsheet from AppSheet.
Sure, and that would, the nice thing about AppSheet is you could add different tables to the same application, right? So you would have your BigQuery table, you would have your spreadsheet table that you connect to that same app, and then you'd have an automation that you can construct. I know I'm kind of hand waving here, like go make an automation, but this automation would be as relatively simple logically as my event would be data changes in this table, and when it changes, then I need to add an entry to this spreadsheet, which shows the change. I'm probably oversimplifying it usually, but that's the approach you would take.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Okay, and now we did get a few questions circling around selling your app or sharing your app or white labeling your app. So I think this one summarizes most of those questions, but how do I publish a proper white labeled app with AppSheet's name not showing up? And then the use case here is so that I can sell the app.
So ultimately it's going to be an AppSheet app. So you will see references to AppSheet, even if you make a white labeled app. Now, I'm assuming because you use that term, you probably have explored the allow list, or the under deploy here, where you can have branded applications. This allows you to deploy applications to the iOS and Android stores. So if we come back here to deploy branded apps, you'll see you can deploy a standalone application to Android or iOS, but there'll still be some references to AppSheet since it's being hosted, by the AppSheet service. Oh, Lauren, you're on mute.
Yeah, Lauren, sorry.
Thanks.
Got quiet there.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say, I know we're a little over time, so I think we can have time just for one more question. But I was seeing some questions around the formulas and creating formulas. So just generally, do you have any recommendations on how to improve or get better at creating formulas and potentially expressions in AppSheet as well?
There is a help doc. It's called Expressions, the Essentials. I can add it into the chat here really quickly. But basically, if you Google it, it'll give you a little bit more coverage on expressions. We also did an office hours last year, I think, where we actually had some other folks join us, and we actually went into a lot more detail on expressions. But it's important to note that expressions are essentially the logical engine that inside of AppSheet that are somewhat analogous to Sheet's formulas, but they're not necessarily the same. There's a whole ton of stuff you can do with expressions inside of AppSheet apps, and so yeah.
Yeah, and in general, our goal is to make it easier over time. So you see currently in the app editor, we have a lot of experiments with natural language that are going on. So all I would say too is that, we have plans to make it even easier this year. So I'm just kind of keep a lookout for that.
And that's something I'll be focusing on in the next few months. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Love it. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Christian. Rich, it's always learning something new and getting better with our app creation when we have the chance to learn from you. So thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and all of your questions. Although we aren't able to tackle every single one, we do look at this. We really value your feedback, your comments, your suggestions. So thank you, and appreciate all of your feedback and for tuning in. Just pulling up these next steps and resources one more time. We'd love to hear your feedback and see you at future sessions. Rich, Christian, any final thoughts before we close out today?
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to do these, and yeah, there's a lot more questions that we can handle, but feel free to post them in the community, and we'll continue to try to answer them as we go along. But yeah,
and then I'll just kind of reemphasize on the troubleshooting side. Don't feel like you have to ever restart your application, because I see that sometimes. Oh, I just need to restart it. The nice thing about AppSheet is you should be able to use those rules that I showed you and try to figure out exactly where you've created issues in your application. and fix those so you don't have to restart over from scratch. You're not going to mess anything up in the application that can't be undone.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, team. Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your day, evening, or wherever you are in the world. See you next time.